October 30th, 1501. The marble floor of the Apostolic Palace in Rome is cold against the skin, but the air is stifling, thick with the scent of roasted chestnuts, sweat, and heavy perfume. 50 courtesans move amidst the flickering candelabras, not in penance, but in a contest orchestrated by Cesare Borgia for his father, Pope Alexander VI. This infamous Banquet of Chestnuts remains the defining image of the depraved sexual practices of the Renaissance popes, a moment where the line between the holy and the profane dissolved completely into the shadows. Johann Burchard, the master of ceremonies, stands in the periphery, his quill scratching furiously against parchment. He records the prizes of silk tunics offered for stamina, noting the moral decay of the church with icy clinical precision. This black diary is our recurring witness, a silent judge in a room of noise. But why did the Vicar of Christ turn St. Peter's shadow into a theater of vice? And what political terror were the Borgias trying to drown in such excess? The Vatican's walls have eyes, but they do not weep. If you enjoy these dark histories, leave a like and subscribe and comment below where you're listening from. And now, back to the story. The laughter from the banquet hall fades, but the silence that follows is heavier than the noise. Rome has descended into a strange captivity, where the sacred keys of St. Peter open doors to private boudoirs rather than the gates of heaven. The Vatican apartments, freshly painted by Pinturicchio, serve as the gilded cage. Here, the faces of angels and saints are painted with the likenesses of the Pope's children and mistresses, permanently blurring the divine with the domestic. The corruption is no longer a secret vice. It has been institutionalized, painted into the very plaster of the Apostolic Palace. Giulia Farnese, known as Giulia la Bella, moves through these halls not as a free woman, but as a living currency. The Romans call her Sponsa Christi, the bride of Christ, in mocking whispers. She is the visible mark of the Pope's earthly tether. Alexander VI does not hide her. He elevates her, renaming the sin as a necessity of state. To be close to the Borgia Pope is to be held in a grip that feels like an embrace, but bruises like a shackle. The cardinals, men of supposed piety, bow to her, understanding that the path to the Pope's ear leads through his mistress's chambers. Gold chains bind tighter than iron shackles. The descent becomes literal in November 1494. King Charles VIII of France marches on Italy, his armies cutting a swath through the peninsula. In the chaos of the invasion, Giulia is captured by a French captain near Capodimonte. This is the moment the mask slips completely. The Vicar of Christ, who should be rallying Christendom against the French threat, is paralyzed not by the danger to the church, but by the seizure of his mistress. The spiritual leader of the Western world is reduced to a desperate lover bargaining with invaders. Negotiations ensue. The Pope ignores the spiritual crisis to secure the return of the flesh. He offers a ransom of 3,000 ducats, a fortune meant for the defense of the Papal States, now redirected to purchase a single woman's freedom. The transaction is cold, administrative, and desperate. The mercy offered by the Borgias to their subjects is conditional. Accept the debasement of the Holy See, and you will be protected. Challenge it, and you face the wrath of a man who values his pleasure above his office. Giulia returns to Rome, but the atmosphere has shifted. The people watch from the shadows of the Seven Hills. There is a quiet will to resist, found not in open rebellion yet, but in the rising voice of the Dominican friar Girolamo Savonarola in Florence. He speaks of a whore of Babylon, a church held captive by its own head. He offers a counter-mercy, a return to purity through fire. But the price of his mercy is high, the destruction of all vanity, all art, all joy. Johann Burchard, our silent chronicler, continues to write in the Black Diary. He notes the return of the mistress, the relief of the Pope, and the sullen anger of the Curia. He does not judge openly, he merely catalogues the descent. The Vatican has become a place where salvation is sold to finance the sins of the night. To refuse the Pope's lifestyle is to risk the poison cup, yet to accept it is to lose one's soul. Silence is the first accomplice to tyranny. The condition is stated openly in the spring of 1497. It arrives not as a whisper in the confessional, but as a papal bull sealed with lead and red wax. Alexander VI offers Florence a choice: silence the little friar Girolamo Savonarola or face the interdict. The condition extends beyond the pulpit of San Marco. It is a test of reality itself. To remain in communion with Rome, the faithful must accept that the brothel keeper sitting on the throne of St. Peter is the conduit of God's will. They must look at the Banquet of Chestnuts, where 50 courtesans crawled naked between candelabras picking up nuts for the Pope's amusement, and see only holy infallibility. Compliance is safety. Dissent is heresy. Savonarola, gaunt and burning with a feverish piety, delivers the refusal. He stands before the terrified masses of Florence, holding the Pope's letter like a diseased limb. He does not offer a defense, he offers an indictment. "I will not obey," he declares, his voice cracking against the stone walls of the cathedral. "I will not obey the devil to please the man." It is a single cold refusal that shatters the political equilibrium. He accuses the Pope of turning the Vatican into a house of prostitution, openly referencing the rumors of incest between Alexander and his daughter Lucrezia. He names the depravity not as a sin of weakness, but as a deliberate inversion of the faith. The escalation is immediate and suffocating. Alexander VI does not debate theology. He chokes the city. He threatens the Florentine merchants with the confiscation of their goods abroad. The spiritual war becomes a siege of hunger. The pressure shifts from the friar to his flock. The depraved Pope proves that his sins have not weakened his grip on the temporal sword. The deprivation begins. No sacraments, no trade, no protection. The silence of God hangs over the city, enforced by the man who mocks him. Inside the Vatican, the why of the depravity finally resolves into focus. The sexual excesses, the orgies, the public mistresses, the rumors of incest were never merely about pleasure. They were a mechanism of isolation and control. By committing acts that no other monarch would dare, the Borgias severed their ties to traditional morality and the old alliances of Europe. If the world hates you, you can only trust your own blood. The incest, real or performed, created a closed loop of loyalty that no outsider could penetrate. The depravity was the moat, the family was the castle. A crown of sins is heavy, but it guards the head that wears it. But meaning inverts in the fire. In May 1498, the pressure breaks the Florentines. They turn on their prophet to save their city. Savonarola is arrested, tortured on the rack until his shoulders are pulled from their sockets, and condemned to burn in the Piazza della Signoria. Yet, as the flames rise, the intended lesson collapses. The fire was meant to purge the critic and validate the Pope's authority. Instead, the spectacle of a friar burning for demanding chastity, ordered by a pope who watches naked courtesans for sport, brands the church with an indelible scar. The price of the Borgia survival is revealed. They have purchased their dynasty's continuity by selling the moral legitimacy of the papacy. The discipline Savonarola preached becomes the armor of the Reformation that will follow. His silence in the fire, he dies without screaming curses, louder than the laughter in the Vatican halls. Burchard records the death in the Black Diary, noting that the ashes were thrown into the Arno River, so no relics could be kept. But the record itself is the relic. The Pope has won the trial of strength, but he has lost the trial of history. The why was power. The price was the very soul of the institution he ruled. Smoke rises, but the truth does not vanish with the wind. August 18th, 1503. The heat in Rome is suffocating, a physical weight that presses against the lungs. Pope Alexander VI lies dead, his body bloated and blackened by rapid decomposition, a phenomenon whispered by the superstitious to be the devil collecting his due, is forced into a coffin that is too small. The Swiss guards pound the lid shut with their fists. With the patriarch gone, the Borgia rebirth collapses into immediate scramble for survival. But the true rebirth happens years later, in silence, under the command of his successor and lifelong enemy, Pope Julius II. Julius enters the Borgia apartments, the opulent suite of rooms decorated by Pinturicchio. He looks up at the walls, there, staring back at him from the fresco. The Dispute of St. Catherine is the face of Lucrezia Borgia cast as the saint. Above a door, the Madonna holds the Christ child, but the face of the Virgin is unmistakably Giulia Farnese, the bride of Christ, who had been ransomed for gold. The blasphemy is not just in the acts committed in these rooms, but in the permanent fusion of the Borgia sexual history with the sacred iconography of the Church. They had literally painted their sins into the face of God. Julius does not scream. He performs a wordless rite of erasure. He refuses to live in the rooms. "I will not live in the same rooms as the Borgias lived," he commands. "I will not look upon the faces of demons." He orders the apartments sealed. The heavy doors are shut, the keys are turned, and the rooms are abandoned to the dust. For over 300 years, the Borgia apartments remain closed, a hidden place in the heart of the Vatican, preserving the murals in the dark. The silence of the sealed rooms screams louder than any sermon. A locked door is a confession in iron, but the true survivor is the Black Diary. Johann Burchard's Liber Notarum is not burned. It is filed away in the deepest recesses of the Vatican's secret archives. This is the cautious evidence that grounds the legend. While the rooms are sealed, the text survives. It contains the dry, administrative records of the Banquet of Chestnuts, the precise number of courtesans, 50, the exact prizes given, tunics, shoes. It is not a piece of Protestant propaganda written decades later. It is the day-to-day log of the papal master of ceremonies, written while the candles were still burning. What was hidden, and what the sealing of the rooms tried to bury, was not just the fact of the orgies, but their function. The diary reveals that these were not merely moments of weakness. They were assertions of absolute power. By forcing the church hierarchy to witness and participate in the debasement, Alexander VI was stripping them of their moral authority to judge him. The depravity was a political tool to ensure that no cardinal could claim the high ground. If everyone is in the mud, the man in the tallest hat is still king. The Borgias were attempting to birth a hereditary monarchy out of a celibate elective office, using shared sin as the binding agent. When the apartments are finally reopened in the late 19th century, the colors are shockingly bright, preserved by the darkness. The faces of the mistress and the daughter still look down, untouched by time, witnesses to a dynasty that tried to outlast God. The rebirth is not of the Borgias, but of the evidence they thought they could normalize. The truth wasn't in the rumors, it was on the walls the whole time. Stone forgets nothing, not even the shadows of the candle. The erasure begins not with a decree, but with a chisel. Across Rome, the grazing bull, the heraldic emblem of the Borgias, is chipped off the stone facades. The coat of arms that once hung over the Vatican gates, signaling the union of the papacy and the family, is smashed into dust. Cesare Borgia, the man who sat at his father's right hand, watching the naked courtesans crawl for chestnuts, dies not as a prince of the church, but as a mercenary in a muddy skirmish in Viana, his body stripped naked by looters and left to the wolves. The dynasty that sought to conquer eternity is reduced to a shallow, unmarked grave. The witnesses recede into the realm of ghost stories. The factual horror of the Liber Notarum is drowned out by the salacious whispers of the Black Legend. The truth of the Banquet of Chestnuts becomes indistinguishable from the myths of poisoned wine and sorcery. The names of the 50 courtesans are lost to time, their faces unrecorded, their lives erased as if they were merely props on a stage that has been struck. The Vatican archives swallow the records, the heavy shelves acting as a dam against the past. The ink dries, the pages yellow, and the silence returns to the apostolic palace. We return to the marble floor of October 30th, 1501. The room is empty now. The heavy perfume and the scent of roasting chestnuts have been replaced by the smell of incense and old wax. Pilgrims and tourists walk over the same stones where the Pope sat and counted the sins of the flesh, unaware of the history beneath their feet. The lighting is electric now, steady and cold, banishing the flickering shadows that once hid the Vatican's secrets. The depraved popes did not destroy the church. They hardened it. The Council of Trent rises from the ashes of the Borgia excess, enforcing a rigid militant morality that will define the next 5 centuries. But the echo remains. The Borgias proved that the holiest seat in Christendom could be bought, sold, and used as a pillow for a mistress. The line between the sacred and the profane was not redrawn. It was merely covered with a thicker rug. The walls still have eyes, but now they have learned to keep them shut. Subscribe, hit the bell, and like. What is washed from the floor remains in the stone.